Today we're going to talk about debt versus equity versus convertible instruments. Now, this is another topic sort of within the larger topic of securities. Securities, again, is a synonym for ownership or equity in your company or your venture. Anytime you are going to sell or give out ownership, it becomes a security if that person that you're giving it to or that company that you're giving it to is outside and not involved with your company. Most of the time, the whole goal of giving out ownership is obviously to receive an influx of funding that allows you to do what you need to do, which makes you more successful, which then whoever gave you that funding gets some of the profit from. Now, sounds simple enough, right? Or maybe it sounds complicated. It is kind of complicated, and where the complication comes in typically is how to make sure that you're compliant when you're dealing with securities and selling or granting securities and issuing those to others. Now, there is a lot that goes into this. I have many videos on it. Please watch the other ones about who your investors are. That might be the most important piece that sort of feeds into and sort of dictates the rest of the compliance for securities. But this video is going to talk on debt versus equity versus convertible instruments, which is sort of a hybrid of the two, just to complicate things further. So obviously debt, we're talking about loans. Now, loans are going to be sort of like a shortcut for people that want to help fund your business or venture, but don't care about having equity. They don't care about having ownership and receiving profits. They just want to help you out, and maybe they just want to be paid back on some regular interval, maybe make a little bit of money on the interest. That's just a traditional loan. With loans, there is far less compliance because it is an arm's length contract transaction where they are paid over time, and if you don't pay, there is a default that occurs and they can collect on the rest of that loan. It's just like any other debt. Now, the downside to that for the lender, they're not an investor. Like I said, they don't receive ownership. They don't receive the upside. If they were an investor and they invest and they get a percentage of ownership and your company goes crazy and is worth tons of money, they get a piece of that. As a lender, they just receive their loan payments. Even if you're the most successful company in the history of the world, they just get their loan payments and probably the loan paid off earlier if you're that successful. So they get no upside. Now, on the other hand, as the person receiving that loan, you don't now have another owner, another partner that might have a say in how you run the business. So it's beneficial for you to do a loan. However, the downside, as the person receiving that loan in your company, you now have debt on your books. For a smaller company, maybe a lifestyle business that doesn't ever have an exit strategy of selling or getting acquired or going public, debt's probably not that big of a deal. But if you're going to go seek VC funders and maybe try to go public, debt looks bad on your books because it's a negative, right? It's not good to see that you're indebted to someone and you have a loan. So those are some of the pros and cons of debt. Now, equity, we've talked a little bit about, that's when you give someone ownership in your company. Giving someone ownership in your company is not as simple as shaking a hand, taking a check, and maybe giving them a stock certificate. Tons of compliance goes into it. Watch my other videos on that. But the long story short there is that who your investor is matters. If they are accredited, it is easier. If they are a friend or a family member, it is easier. And when I say easier, I mean less paperwork, less expense. And essentially, when you give someone equity, there's a bunch of ways to do it. You can have it vest over time. I've got other videos on that. You can just give it to them outright. You can give it to them in certain circumstances. If certain events happen, they receive ownership. There are stock options. So that's an option to purchase equity upon certain events. Lots of different ways to do ownership equity securities. And the important thing to mention there is that those people, when they receive that equity, that security from your company, they're then a partner in it. They are an owner. They have certain rights. They may even be able to vote. There are a lot of things that go along with equity. And you need to buy it back from them if you ever want them out or if they ever want to leave. And they can sell it to others under certain circumstances. And in a lot of situations, if you don't put the proper paperwork in, the proper language in your paperwork that you have with them for their ownership of that equity, they can go sell it however they want. You need to have rights of first refusal and certain option procedures to prevent them from just selling it to whoever they want. Because then you have a new owner, partner, that you didn't choose. Now, convertible instruments. These are kind of like a hybrid of the two things we talked about. Most of them are going to be a convertible note. A convertible note is a loan. until it converts into equity, because that's not confusing, right? So usually with convertible notes, there's some event that happens later, like another round of funding. Let's say you do a friends and family round and you give all your friends and family a convertible note. Well, if you get to your seed round or your Series A round, maybe that's the trigger, that's the event that makes that note convert. So you do the friends and family round, seed round, whatever, and you give someone convertible notes. Well, those notes are loans and they may even be paid back like a normal loan until you do that next round of funding or get acquired, and then it converts into ownership that those people actually get instead of it being a loan. The benefit there is that depending on the type of convertible instrument, there's also one called a SAFE and one called a KISS. The KISS stands for Keep It Simple Security. SAFE stands for some similar version of that silly acronym. And both of those typically are not going to be debt on your books. Good, according to what we talked about earlier with debt, but they're a little different. They're not the same as a convertible note, and essentially they may not give the same rights to the person that holds those KISS or SAFE instruments because it's not the same as a convertible note. All of these convertible instruments, however, are a good and sort of flexible tool to use because sometimes it allows you to kick the can down the road on the compliance needed for those investors that we talked about. So all the paperwork and the expense of having a compliant investment round. The convertible note, since it might be a loan early on, sometimes allows you to avoid that compliance. I'm using a lot of mights, ifs, and really contingent words here because none of this is always going to be a super cut and dry thing. Definitely speak to a lawyer about when it's appropriate to use debt versus equity versus convertible instruments, and then how to be compliant when using them. But again, the thing to highlight for this video is that debt, there's no ownership, there's no equity, they don't have any rights other than to collect on their loan, just like a lender, like a bank or anything similar to that. Friends and family members can give you loans, of course, and then it's a even more informal thing. Equity, that's going to be the traditional, you give someone shares or a percentage, they receive profits and losses, they pay for that or they give you services for that. It can be vested over time. There's lots of compliance that goes with that. And then convertible instruments, sort of a hybrid of the two. Obviously, given that it is a hybrid of the two, it can get pretty involved. So definitely work with a lawyer on any of these really to make sure that you're making the most important and prudent steps for your company that don't allow you to get taken advantage of earlier by those investors or receive tax penalties or issues with the government. So debt, equity, securities, convertible instruments, some buzzwords here. Hopefully they become less buzzwordy and you understand them a little more after watching this and my other videos. Thanks for watching.